Hello, Anidorks. Have we got a treat for you? Today's episode is our interview with the one, the only David Mattingly, who did the book covers, the artwork for the book covers for the Animorphs series. I'm without words. I mean, we're as confused as you are. We don't know how this happened, and frankly, we don't want to know. You know, it's something we just, stop asking questions or just be happy it happened. Thank you to David for coming on the show. We had so much fun making this episode. You can find David Mattingly at davidmattingly.com, where you can look at his artwork and order prints. He also has an Etsy store that's Animorphs Art Store, and you can follow him on Twitter/X at David Mattingly or on Instagram at Animorphs Artist. Yeah, I won't waste any more of your time. Here is the episode as it happened.
These may be kids' books, but we discuss dark themes and mature content. There may also be some explicit language. Listener discretion is advised.
Brandy, you have NDA in your name. We have to start making more jokes about that. I'm sending the email to him, which may cause events to transpire involving him signing on to this call, okay? Oh my god, this is gonna be so fun! You guys, we're adding our information to the lexicon of history. People will be like, original source, Anidorks podcast.
What is significant in showing teeth in a self-portrait? I feel like I finally understand
It was a really great string of thoughts that you kind of low-key mocked me for. Oh, here he is, guys. You guys, yeah, really? He's here. Are you guys ready? Are you ready? I need a verbal yes, yeah, Miranda. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, all right.
Yes.
Okay, I'm going for it. Wow.
We all just completely froze. Just, what?
We can. Hey, hello. Hello. Thank you for joining us. We're so excited about this. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Also, it's cool. I was just watching the interview where you had that same background.
Yep.
Yeah, that's my bookcase up here in my studio, and the top three rows are the books I've done.
Wow.
And from there on down, it's reference books of artists, and right here. It's a whole bunch of bugs right over here too. Those are made by my friend Paul Yule, who is an amateur. Whatever the specialty
entomologist is. Not etymologist, but entomologist,
something like that. But
I used to know one of those.
He has a twin brother, and when the twin brother moved, he knew that I had admired his bug mounting collections a lot. So I got them, and I've now got them on display in my in
but
my
they were
bookcase.
not used as source for Animorphs paintings, or
I think these were given to me well after the Animorphs books. I did all of them around the year 2000. So
wow,
it's quite some time ago now.
Yes.
But you've never done any of the collecting
because
yourself.
I teach at Pratt Institute and at School of Visual Arts in New York City. And a lot of the students, when they learn that I did the Animorphs books, it's like, oh, I read those as a kid. They're all about the right age to have actually gotten those, and now they're college students. So it's sort of my claim to fame.
That's how we came across it. Eddie, do you want to take it away?
Yeah. Well, David, thank you so much for making some time to speak with us tonight. So we started recording this podcast about 2 years ago.
Yeah.
Was it
Yeah.
early 2022? And only, like, I read about maybe 20, 30 of the books as a kid. Chris and Miranda, the thing we had in common was going to Scholastic book fairs and seeing your covers on the shelves there. And it was actually the covers that made us want to, like, what was that thing that we all kind of experienced growing up?
Oh, it was so magical.
And, like,
yeah.
I think the covers. Yeah.
And to see them come back around now as people are becoming adults, seeing them more in popular media, memed and things like that, I think is when we all were like, wow, we really do need to go back and read those books and give them a real critical look through. Has there been, I mean, you said your students often know about it, but I mean, recently, even on Last Week Tonight with John Oliver, Animorphs style transformation got used as a shorthand for that transformation in stages. And like, so I guess I just wonder how it feels to have had that much of an impact on how we view visual media.
Well, I'm certainly very proud of having that, and I feel lucky to have gotten the assignment. You know, when you're working on a particular project, you never know what is really going to resonate. I recently had a cover that I sent to Heritage Auctions, and it skyrocketed up in price, and I had no idea why this would be such a valuable cover, you know, compared to all my other work, and I certainly didn't consider it to be particularly good, but it turned out it was for a famous video game. And so lots of people were bidding on that. You know, when I was working on it, I had no idea. And sometimes covers that I really put, you know, my heart and soul and a lot of work into, you know, the book has no resonance with people, so you never know exactly what is going to happen with a project. And when I initially did the Animorphs series, they'd had a lot of trouble finding a cover artist. They originally tried a guy who actually did, I think, the first two covers using. Well, it was the equivalent of a 3D program that has become Maya since, and he was trying to do it all in 3D, which really is
very ambitious for the time.
Yeah, no, even right now it would be very difficult to do. I mean, I know Pixar could do it, but you know, you'd better have $1 million to do those covers. If you were going to model all of that. And then they went with a traditional illustrator who did the cover with Rachel and the cat. Which
that was
and I thought
that improvement. I feel like from the weird gecko 3D head to the cat, it was a
I thought he did a really good job. But I got the assignment, I think, primarily because the art director up there at the time, a guy named Dave Tomasino, knew that I had bought a computer and I had started to work digitally after 20 years of working traditionally. And I may have been the only artist he knew who was actively working on a computer. And right about that time, you know, this program called Elastic Reality, which no longer exists, came on the market. And when I got the assignment, they called me in and they asked, you know, do you know how to do morphing? And I said, yes, although I'd never actually done it before. So I bought Elastic Reality and had it overnighted to me. And that was what I used. And, I periodically get requests from people, through my Etsy shop, asking if I will do a custom Animorphs cover, and they're always disappointed and upset. You know, it takes me a couple of weeks to do an Animorphs cover, and I think people are sort of under the impression you just put like a dog and a person, and then you push a button and then it does all of that, and that wasn't my experience at all. You know, especially with Elastic Reality, which was very buggy at the time. I recently did some morphs for a clothing designer, and I used a program that I use for compositing at School of Visual Arts called Nuke. which it's so much better than the program that I used to do all of the covers. The covers would arguably be better today because Nuka is a very stable program. I still remember those nights when I would have everything set up and try and get a morph out of it, and then it would crash, and I would lose all of my work. So basically, the process is, I would take a dog or a mosquito or whatever we were going to morph, and the character that they planned to morph, and then I'd do a halfway, and I'd get this total mess, and then I'd go in and I'd take inspiration from what I got out of that morph, and then I'd basically paint everything over again, and then I'd do from the character to the halfway morph, and then from the halfway morph to the animal, and then I go in and I paint again. So basically, I would shoot a model for the beginning with the character, and then I'd either find a photograph of an animal, or actually photograph the animal myself in some cases, and the in-between parts were largely painted, even though the morph was very useful for getting the sort of textures that you get from that distortion and cross-dissolving that morphing allows.
So it would lead your eye to what you could then better express with your own actual painting skill. And
absolutely, and there's a problem with smearing and tearing when you do a morph, because you're pulling information from one location to another, and if you've done it just perfectly, you won't get these tremendous tears in the image that occur when a lot of times it's not super obvious how it needs to go, and it's weird if you actually doing it in motion, like that Ron Howard movie Willow had some of the first morphing, and that was from a character to a tiger. And, part of it was that was all in motion, but the moment you have a still image and, people can actually sit down and study the images, it's much less forgiving in terms of, tearing and smearing of information. So, I had to go in and fix up all of the in-between morphs on those.
Do you remember if it felt like stimulating work at the time? Like when you first started working on the covers, did it feel like just another job for you, or was it something you were excited about to play with, like this technology?
Well, it was something I was very excited about. I've always been really interested in what the computer can do. And I remember seeing Terminator 2, which I think was the first instance of morphing. And, you guys all look like you're too young to remember this. But
I saw it on TV at some point.
When I saw it, it was like, oh my God.
Millennials are hard to impress. We've seen it all. No, I'm just kidding.
Well, one of the things in visual effects is they want to figure out something that will no one will be able to figure out how they did it. And morphing was one of the first things. And actually, when the Matrix first came out, and they had that bullet time camera, and of course, then people just use it again and again, and you see it on Pepsi commercials and every imaginable thing, and it's like, oh no, not another bullet time.
But at one point, it was a huge technical endeavor.
I saw The Matrix in the theater, and I was like, oh my God! I had no idea how they actually did that. And people are. The visual effects community is always trying to figure out the next thing that will make the audience say, oh, I can't figure out how that was done.
When you started working with computers, there was already an interest there for you. You said around the time the Animorphs covers were coming out, it wasn't like purely a career move. It wasn't something so that you could get a job like this. It sounds like there was also an interest there.
No, I worked traditionally for 20 years, from the 70s to. I actually remember when I bought the first computer. It was in 1994, around the time that I got married to my wife. The Photoshop at that point actually had one layer and one undo. And when I tell my students that, it's like, how did you ever manage to work with that? I mean, if you took material from another source and you put it into your working area, and then you did a selection or anything, it was like that previous thing was completely sunk in and impossible to extract. And of course now when I work, I'll have 100 layers, and I generally turn undos up to like 100. You get really deep into something, and then you think, oh gee, I wish I hadn't done that.
I saw a comic artist actually tap a thing they were drawing on. They were drawing on paper, and on an iPad, it's double tap to undo.
Right.
And they made a mistake, and then they physically tapped the paper. It was exhilarating.
I do physical painting with a really extraordinary painter, a guy named Steve Assell. And I've been working digitally for so long that when I make a mistake, I will think undo. And of course, you can't do that when you're physically oil painting. So it's a completely different way of thinking.
Yeah, well, we saw you have your a self-portrait you did on your website, right? That's
I do, yes, and that's physically
we also
painted.
happen to notice that in your bio on your website, you mentioned that your father invented the Waterpik. And
he did,
I was just curious, like, I don't know what the significance of a self-portrait, like what showing teeth in a self-portrait would be, but why doesn't yours show teeth if yours are presumably in the best shape of anybody's?
Well, I do. I have the serious portrait at the beginning of my site, and then I've got another one where I'm smiling.
Then I just need to dig deeper.
So we just haven't found it yet.
No, I have been using the Waterpik ever since my dad invented it, and he invented it when I was 4 or 5.
Wow.
So, it was. He invented it in Fort Collins, Colorado, where I grew up. And the plant that still makes most of the Waterpiks is in Fort Collins. It's called Aquatech.
Wow.
But they recently changed the name of it to Water Flosser. And it's a rare instance where I'm so glad my dad is dead, because if he had learned that they had changed the name of it to Water Flosser, he would have hated that. He always said, the Waterpik does a different thing than flossing does, and he was a great proponent of flossing.
Wow.
So, but it was completely out of his hands. And he died 24 years ago.
Yeah, that is one of those shifts where I can't imagine what the marketing value would be. Like, I feel like the Waterpik was a brand unto itself. Yeah.
Yeah. Who doesn't know what a Waterpik
I mean,
is?
when they change the name of a product that is already established, I always think, well, why doesn't someone buy that name? And then they can put out
We got to buy up the domain names. Yes.
Our Anidorks website could be Waterpik. No. I was curious, when you took that job, not knowing exactly, because, you gave such a great answer outlining sort of the process that you arrived at. What was the trial and error like? Like, did you go in, what did you expect the program to be able to do for you? Were you concerned about, like, the timelines to figure this stuff out? Like, what sorts of things did you try that didn't work, maybe?
Well, I do have another version of the cover. I actually turned in a couple of different versions to Scholastic so that they would have something to choose from. And they ultimately went with that cloud background that we repeated throughout all of the books. But, my fallback is if I couldn't get the morphing program to give me the material that I wanted. I was just going to paint it. And since I was working digitally on the computer, it would look different than an illustrator who was working in paint. And I could use the photographic reference of the kids and not have to paint it. So, luckily I was able to get elastic reality to work for me, even though it was extremely primitive at the time.
What was the difference between those different versions that you turned in? Did you prefer the one that they ended up picking, or?
I did, yeah. No, I should also mention that most of those books were designed by a wonderful designer named Karen Hudson. And when you look at the books, she did all the type design and all of the other stuff. And I really liked her as a designer because she made my work look really good. I mean, there's nothing more disappointing than turning in what you think is a really good cover and then have the designer do something wacky that makes you look completely not so good. So, as an illustrator, you're very much at the hands of the designer, unless you want to become a designer yourself.
And do you remember what they were looking for in a cover? Because it would have been Scholastic that asked for it, right? You weren't communicating directly with K.A. Applegate?
No, I wasn't. There's a reason why a lot of times they keep the authors separated from the process of creating the cover. And the main reason for that is the cover is just a selling tool. If the book sells well, the cover's done its job.
Yep. Yeah.
And, I hate covers that mislead you, like it has something completely different than what happens inside the books. But I was at a convention, and this author was complaining about her cover. And I said, let me see the cover, and it was a terrific cover, and it was by a big name illustrator also. So I know that the company had a lot of faith in her writing. Mm-hmm. So I just got to emphasize to authors that it isn't necessarily an illustration of your book. It's a tool to get people to read your book. And Catherine Applegate was always wonderful. I think she was just concerned with getting the books out there. I think she knew she had a really interesting idea that needed to be exploited. As long as the covers were working, I think she just left it alone.
And, they really do, speaking to what you said about the cover illustrating what actually happens in the books actually do go into a lot of detail about the morphing. So you do feel like you get, it delivers on its promise of this cool morphing cover. You go in and you're like, oh, wow, they're actually going to explain how the people morph from one thing to another. And so it works out really nicely.
Well, go ahead.
Oh, I always wondered about clothing. I'm assuming the kids had to get naked.
Well, no, they actually they magic wanded their way through that one. They could wear very tight morphing outfits, and that's like.
Yeah, it was the Scholastic equivalent of the Comics Code Authority, where it's they have to be able to wear something. And then for the TV show, they actually just ditched that completely. They were like, nope, they can morph clothes. They can morph clothes.
Have you read enough to have a taste for when and how morphing is represented in the books?
When I did the books, they gave me cover concepts, basically of what they wanted. They didn't give me the entire books. In a lot of cases, the books weren't written. They knew basically.
I hadn't thought about that yet. But you're doing the cover for it, so yeah.
So I've primarily done science fiction in my career, and the reason science fiction there's been a tradition where they just give the illustrators the books, and part of that is none of the books are important enough to the entire line of a company that they really worry about it. I mean, if you had a new book by Stephen King or something like that, they're not going to give that to an illustrator. It's like, no, you've got to cover conference that. And, plus, with the Stephen King book, what you really want is a giant Stephen King and maybe like a little teensy-weensy illustration.
That's a good point.
Yeah, I mean, when it's a really important book to a line, they won't give it to an illustrator to do. And I think that these Animorphs books were very important to Scholastic. I ultimately read the books, after I had finished the series, primarily just because I was interested in why people were so excited about them. And yeah, I certainly like the books. I'm not sure I would have done much different even if I'd read the books. The cover conference ideas were excellent.
Yeah. Do you think it was the morphing itself that was the thing that caught on? Do you have a sense of why the covers were so successful that we all have them burned into
how did you change our lives?
Imagination?
I think kids all think about how fantastic it would be to change into an animal.
For sure.
I've had cats all my life, and I often think about if I could be a cat just for a day and understand what they're thinking, and I think part of that tied into a real desire in kids to inhabit or be one with animals. And the morphing, especially with the various stages in that, it was very weird. Like the halfway stage of the morph, it's combining these two really quite different things into one. As a kid, I loved studying covers. I was one of those people that, I would stare at the cover for hours and ultimately read them, but the covers were just as important as the books to me. One of my big influences was this guy named Frank Frazetta. Do you guys know Frazetta's work?
Not by his name alone, I'm sorry.
I mean, he was basically the founder of heroic fantasy. Before him, nobody had done exactly what he did, and he was a terrific draftsman and a terrific painter. And I just remember getting those books, especially the Conan books, and just studying Frank's covers for hours and hours to, try and figure out all of the detail. And he also did the Edgar Rice Burroughs books for the Science Fiction Book Club. He did special covers, and they were really nice. He's passed away, but he's still one of the best illustrators who ever were.
Yeah.
I'm looking at some of his artwork now, and I'm seeing things that I definitely think I have seen before throughout my life, and it's
powerful.
Really nice work.
I can't wait to tell my friend who loves Conan.
When I mention Frazetta to my students, it's like a lot of them have no idea who he is. When I went to art school, literally everyone knew who Frazetta was. And also a lot of the classic illustrators, Howard Pyle, N.C. Wyeth, those guys were huge influences on me. But I know that there's a whole new generation of people, primarily working digitally. None of these guys work digitally because there weren't any digital tools back then.
Yeah, it's funny. The one weakness we have on this podcast is none of us are visual artists. Musician, writers,
it's one thing we don't do.
So that's also probably hurting us in that recollection.
You said at the beginning that it took you a few weeks to work on a cover. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. And we've heard the stories about how. So for K.A. Applegate writing the books, she was, I think, doing a book a month. She was working really quickly on the series. And was that as intense for you? I think she's talked about how she had, like, over a long period of time, some kind of burnout from working at that rate. But was that, did it move at the same pace for you, or do you feel like you had a different rhythm that you were working at?
Well, I did generally a cover a month for them.
Okay. Wow.
And my native pace is, a cover every 2 weeks. I mean, if you're a whole lot slower than that, it's really hard to make a living as an illustrator.
Wow.
But I think authors. I mean, when you think of people taking 5 years to write a book or a year to write a book, and then trying to write a book in a month, I can certainly see how she burned out on trying to write at that clip, and that constant demand, especially once the series took off, that you continue writing. And I think she handed off some of the writing, but kept an eye on that, or edited all of the people's work so that it was consistent with her style.
Yeah. And do you remember that moment when you realized, or a moment when you started to realize that the books were taking off?
The only thing I remember seeing some of the books, and when I would talk to kids, like 7-year-olds, and tell them that I was working on the new Animorphs cover, and then suddenly having them perk up and say, "Oh, that's fantastic." But there aren't a lot of series I've worked on where there are fans or people who will know the particular series. The one series I work for that has a lot of attention is the Honor Harrington series that I do for Baen Books. But that captures a much older audience. I'm guessing most of the people who read that are in their 20s or something like that. And, these books were aimed at young adults. So it was a completely different market for me. So, other than suddenly noticing that people knew the covers I was working on, which was kind of an unusual thing, unless you're doing Isaac Asimov or some famous author in the science fiction world, it's hard for people to really know about covers that you're working on, and that was what was unusual about the Animorphs books.
Speaking of Asimov, you worked on iRobot, didn't you?
I did. I actually moved to New Zealand and worked on that. It's the Will Smith version of the of iRobot.
I remember what sort of work did you do on it? Because I remember the strikingness of the visual faces on the robots and the amount of emotion that they had.
I didn't have anything to do with that, unfortunately. I've worked as a matte artist for many years, and matte painting is a technique where you combine painted imagery with live-action film. So there's a shot at the end of the film where Will Smith has damaged his arm, and he's standing in a window, and he looks down at the courtyard where they're rounding up all of the robots. And I worked on that shot and a bunch of other shots in it. And it was really nice. I loved working in New Zealand, and I brought my wife down there, and then we traveled all over New Zealand after I was done on the show.
Do you still get opportunities like that? Like how many films have you worked on? Because I think before Animorphs, you were doing a lot more of that. Right?
Yeah, no, I worked on The Black Hole. I worked at Walt Disney Studios for a number of years while I was getting my illustration career off the ground. But I've been teaching at School of Visual Arts in Pratt, and generally when they call you, they want you to drop everything and come. With the WEDA experience, I basically had 3 or 4 days to decide whether I was going to do that. And when you're teaching, you can't just say, too bad, we're halfway through the semester, I've got to do something else. And when I worked on iRobot, I had to give back a couple of cover assignments, but luckily my publishers were really understanding. I was working a lot with Jim Bain and Bain Books, and actually one of my covers I had done sketches for, but not the finish. And they handed it off to another artist to do the final, which I always thought was funny. I can't imagine working over someone else's work, but this guy did a great job.
I think I heard in another interview that you often start with sketches, right, for your work? That's often the first step that you take?
Oh, yeah, you always do. I mean, you want to give the publisher an idea of what you're going to give them, and I generally try and give them 3 or 4 ideas, a variety of different solutions so that they can pick one. I mean, you don't want to, you can't read the book and then say, here it is, the finished painting. Take it or leave it.
Yeah. It took me a really long time, so please no notes.
Yeah.
Yeah, no. No revisions in this contract.
I mean, it's one of the reasons why working digitally has really taken over. There was a guy who named Drew Struzan, who used to do movie posters. And he was very fast. And, when you're working on movie posters, they pay you a lot of money, but you'll have all kinds of people come in and they'll say, we love this, but just move the head half an inch to the right. Well, if you're working traditionally, you just have to paint out the entire head and paint it in the new position. And then you'll bring it in and they'll say, oh, no, we liked it better the old way. And then, Drew just got into the habit of no matter how many changes they put him through, he would just go home and do it. So being fast in the movie industry, especially with movie posters, was really helpful. I've never been particularly fast in doing covers. There are stories like one of the guys who used to do spaceship covers a lot, named Chris Voss. And Chris actually said that he managed to do a cover in one day. I've never managed to do a cover in one day. Working, at the fastest possible rate I can, it takes me 5 days to do a cover. Just because that's sort of my natural rate.
I would have guessed that 2 weeks was fast when you said that.
Yeah, that sounds
Yeah,
pretty quick.
2 weeks seemed fast to me. There's a lot I can't get done in a day, so 1 day sounds crazy.
Something that's been cooking in the back of my head since we hit the topic, because I remember hearing in an interview, something you hit upon earlier was talking about sort of the one-upsmanship of different developments and what's popular in movies, sort of with morphing and the Terminators 2 just blowing everybody's mind by getting this effect particularly well. And now we're heading to a future where it seems like art, and maybe specifically just commercial art, humans are going to keep painting on twigs for the rest of time in memoriam, but it seems like we're heading to an ultra flexible space where process is kind of completely going to be obfuscated from people's workflows. It won't be people working from photos to the program back to painting necessarily. And I was just wondering, if you could talk about that and sort of those trends that you've watched sort of come together across your career, having done the traditional method and then being excited about computers, and now we're living in iRobot?
Well, we're living in the advent of artificial intelligence, and if you've been experimenting with Midjourney or any of these DALL-E or any of these programs, I suspect it's going to be the death knell for commercial illustration. Because, a lot of these jobs, like doing illustration for the New York Times, they were very well paid for an illustrator. But if an art director can describe sort of what he wants and have Midjourney turn out, something that will be suitable for their usage, I think it's just going to eliminate the need for commercial illustrators. And I always think when photography came along, for many years you would have to hire an artist in order to have a portrait of yourself. And of course, when photography came along, you could take a picture of yourself, and it was probably more accurate than what the artist was going to do. And a lot of jobs that were creating portraits, went away when you could have a photograph. And there were a lot of extraordinary artists that we haven't seen the likes of, like John Singer Sargent and Velasquez, and these were guys that just spent an entire lifetime developing their talent in one particular area, and I think it's a loss to the world to not have talents like that and not have people have an opportunity to develop their talents. When you look at an artist like Sargent, I mean, he seems to have been just a genius right from the get-go. But then he had years and years of working on one particular thing to develop his talent. There's another website that I always keep my eye on that I'm fascinated by, called the Art Renewal Center, ARC, and they're sort of on the warpath with modern art, and I kind of like modern art. There's a lot of art that I really like, and they always mention a guy who I think was really good, named Bouguereau, and he was one of the most famous artists of his day. And he's largely forgotten today. I mean, if you had mentioned anyone in 1860 that you owned a Bouguereau, it would have been like, oh, fantastic. It would be like owning a Van Gogh or a Da Vinci or something like that. But these were extraordinary painters, and we probably won't ever see their like again, because they just don't have the time and the economic reason to develop these talents. And one of the problems in the Art Renewal Center is, now that we have photography, what is an artist supposed to do? What is an artist supposed to express? And various artists come up with various solutions to this. This guy who I paint with, named Steve Assel, just paints human figures. And they're so beautifully done, and the colors that he manages to get in the face and his sense of color, that's one solution. But when you look back at other artists, like David or Ang or any of these guys who, they were painting political leaders of their day, or they were painting for the church, and all of those jobs have gone away. What do we need from an artist at this time? And I don't really have an answer to that either.
It is an interesting thing because there are many different levels of it. There's the like high art getting traded back and forth, and how do you but it all has to come from some incentive. Like there has to be a bunch of artists for those few examples to even get their chance. Miranda, what were you going to say? I feel like I cut you off.
Well, yeah, no, to go with what you were saying, just getting the time as children seems to be something that we're steering more and more away from and taking arts out of early education. But I was going to ask, as someone who worked so closely with developing technologies as they were emerging in your artwork, and you said, the photograph replaced a lot of portrait artists' jobs, and it did, but photography sort of took on as a new art form. Is there something about AI specifically that really feels different than the other tools that you could use to make art differently or to produce new and cutting-edge art? Is there something specific about AI that just feels different?
I think that AI art is going to replace a lot of fairly mundane tasks for illustrators and artists. But, if you've experimented with Midjourney, Midjourney is attempting to copy artist styles.
Yeah.
But if you type in, I want a scene of people eating dinner at a table in the style of Norman Rockwell,
right,
what it produces is not going to be something you'll say, oh my God, there's a brand new Norman Rockwell that I've never seen. It's really far from what Norman Rockwell or Gustav Klimt or any of these artists with a really distinctive style. Mm-hmm. And you would think that they would be the easiest ones to knock off, like Klimt in particular. Klimt had a certain thing that he did with the patterning and all of that, and you'd think that AI would be able to study what he was doing technically and figure it out. And they still, it's still quite far from being anything like a Klimt. Now, who knows? 10 years from now, it may be able to actually ingest enough of Klimt's work that they'll be able to produce something new that will look exactly like a Klimt. Or there's 1,000 examples of Rockwell's work out there. And it's certainly possible at some point in the future they'll be able to replicate what Rockwell did. But with the very best artists, I think that there's a certain sensibility that is imbued in their work that is absent from AI. But AI is just a couple of years old.
Yeah.
Let's wait 10 years and see what it'll do.
What I hear in that is like you talked about the loss of these or AI replacing these mundane skills, and then also the level of investment that people used to have to put into their craft is the loss of craft. It's the loss of people investing time and energy and experience into learning those mundane skills, but then also pushing them towards something higher, I guess.
It is, yeah. Yeah, I mean, especially drawing. Drawing takes a long time to learn. And, if you're constantly with an iPhone or an iPad, you're never going to pick up these skills that were developed by people that, had a simpler life, with less complications or less things that would interfere with your.
Got to pass the time somehow,
Yeah.
It's funny too, because I think the reason why and I think we're all probably champing at the bit to ask is because the Animorphs sits in such an interesting place of being like a sci-fi book, but very, very entrenched in the 90s and trying to think forward. Like there's a sort of telekinesis where they can talk, and that all happens in like coding tags. There was a sort of a dripping technological future thing going on there. And I don't know, just how much it's a product of the tools how much it is not a future thing is somebody brilliant will come along and fix my words. Some AI will come in and say it for me.
No, I think I get what you're saying. It's interesting to look back at the Animorphs and realize how futuristic it felt when we were reading it, and then to go back and read it now and realize that nothing in it was outside of the realm of like conception in the 90s. It really was like... But I think that's sort of an interesting first sci-fi for kids almost, because I think it gets you thinking about what you can do with the things around you. I think that's something kind of cool about it.
Thank you for being brilliant enough to have my thought to finish.
That's what I'm here for. I keep it rolling.
Yeah. David, you mentioned this sorry, my dog's going off right now.
Hit the snooze.
Like an alarm. My dog's going off. Yeah, my cat went off a little earlier too.
You mentioned making art for a video game.
Yeah.
Do you know what was the video game was, or do you remember the name?
It was a book series based on a video game. And of course, I'm not going to be able to recall what it was.
Well, we'll go into a deep dive on
it. Oh, man. We got to find out.
I didn't do a lot of work with the video games. Now I certainly wish I had done more like Magic cards and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Because the sale price on those originals is, phenomenal.
That is so valid. I almost brought up Magic cards, and I didn't, like, when you showed us the one artist, and I was like, this looks like what Magic cards wants to be. And it's like, yeah.
I know, I've got an ink moth nexus burning a hole in my pocket, gonna pay for my kids' college,
Yeah, I think a lot of the artists who did Magic cards were very influenced by Frazetta. I mean, that was sort of the style that they were reaching for. And Magic obviously didn't have any Frazetta stuff because it would have been way out of their budgetary constraints. But you never know what is going to be really popular 20 years in advance. If you really knew that,
I guess we'd all be millionaires.
You'd be the richest person in the world.
Yeah.
Who are the artists that you're really excited about now, like in any medium? Because it sounds like your taste is like pretty far reaching. Like who is like of this like younger generation that's exciting for you?
God, so many of my references are older people. There were one of my primary influences was a comic artist named Jim Steranko. And, Steranko didn't have a huge body of work, but it was incredibly innovative. He's still around. And another artist was a guy named John Buscema, who drew Conan for many years. And he was very productive. He passed away, I don't know, a decade ago or something like that. But his work wasn't particularly innovative, but just his draftsmanship was so beautiful. I'm not a big fan of romance comics. But if you can ever find some of the romance comics that Buscema did, I mean, the guy just drew women so beautifully. Who of new artists? There's a French artist, a digital artist named Sparth, whose work I really like. And he is of that.
Oh, wow.
New generation. And there's another artist, I mean, all of these guys are probably well into their 40s, named Craig Mullins, who's a concept artist. And he has a website called Good Brush. I mean, all of these guys are extraordinarily talented, but, they're really good painters over and above the fact that they work digitally. I mean, a lot of my influences. There's a landscape artist named Richard Schmidt, But again, these are older guys. Richard probably is 70 or 80 at this point. But, he just works traditionally. Not at this point do they want to make a switch to painting digitally after all those years of working traditionally.
Oh, why would you? So you get into a way of working.
Well, there's an artist, an illustrator named Donato Giancola, whose work he just goes by Donato, and Dan was one of the few people who really never made the switch to working digitally. And I think it was really smart. So many people have made the switch to working digitally. And, the transition was relatively easy for me, primarily because I never really took a huge advantage to what paint did. The thickness of paint and building it up and blending and all this sort of stuff. I always worked relatively flatly. Yeah. So the transition to digital painting was a very natural one to me. But, for these guys that have developed the skills to be analog painters, and, there's fewer and fewer of them out there. So if you want an analog painting, you're going to have to go to one of the few people that have hung on to their skills.
Yeah, that echoes my experience with people who repair amplifiers. Just fewer and fewer.
So you're a musician? I'm fascinated by... did you hear a guy who I've always admired, Eric Carmen, died this last weekend? And he wrote "Go All the Way" and "All by Myself" and and a song that he is like his magnum opus called "Boats Against the Current." It's a fantastic song, and it never got played anywhere. But why do these recordings from the 50s, 60s, and 70s sound so good? I mean, they're kind of dirty, and there's mistakes and stuff like that. And now with Pro Tools, you can
get
go
rid
through
of all of it.
Yeah, all the character is gone.
Well, hearing you talk about the painting, it has a lot of analog, because that idea of and then digital got there too with Mid-Journey copying styles. It's if you wanted to look like brushstrokes, Mid-Journey's going to think about that.
They can, yeah.
And it's all the same stuff. Being an audio engineer it used to be very, very technical, and now it's more and more like you're an audio director pointing the program in directions, asking for aesthetics, and soon it'll be I wrote some lyrics, give me a tune, which is fun. Yeah. And it's just, but I think it was great hearing your answer that, because I think that it's all active questions for me as well. I've learned so many skills, and I've worked hard on them, and it's interesting to have lived long enough to watch some of them become obsolete or even obscure. It's also great fun.
And yet, the skills that you've given to me as well, with the limited audio engineering that I have, I have friends who I have friends who do things like live streaming and things like that, and all the sound is very quickly taken care of for them. But when there is a problem, they do not know how to fix it.
Yeah.
And I feel like there's some corollary to that in what you're saying, David, about not having the baseline skills of drawing with a pencil if you always draw digitally, and that there are certain things that can only be done certain ways, sort of.
Yeah, absolutely. The level of draftsmanship, you just don't see the kind of draftsman that you would see 100 years ago, 200 years ago, working today, primarily because people don't have to do it.
Well, we got to end on something lighter than that.
Well, David, I'm curious. Yeah, I know we're getting into your dinner time around this time, I think. Is there anything that you I know you do like a wide range of interviews. Is there anything that you don't often get a chance to talk about that you want to talk about here?
God,
That's such an open-ended question, Eddie. If you asked me that, I would.
Well, I feel like
I'm
we
teasing,
came out knowing that we wanted to ask you about the Animorphs covers.
Yeah, but
and I know you
obviously-
get those requests.
And we're very, very Animorphs focused, which we apologize for.
no, that's what I expect.
Yeah.
I have a fair number of interests. One of the things I'm really interested in is movies, and I'm a movie buff. And I know a lot about music of the 70s and 80s when I was growing up. And I joke that I know more about the Eagles than probably one of the Eagles know. I mean, I know everything about them. I really love that
That's
group.
awesome.
Yeah.
And if only, we could have morphed them into actual eagles using
It would have been so beautiful.
using
Release
elastic.
them.
Anyway, trying to make. I'll see myself out. Anyway.
No, but we appreciate so much. This is actually the first interview we've done with.
Yeah, thank you so much for being with us. This is
Yeah.
really cool for
Is there
us.
anything that you would like to plug, like your website or your prints or anything like that?
Yes, you can go to davidmattingly.com. And that has a searchable database of all of the covers I've done. Something like 1,000 covers are up there. And I also have an Etsy store under Animorphs artists. And so you could go there. But the website, Etsy has a little bit more elegant way of billing you for the shipping. And in my website, it was hard for me to get precisely the amount of money for the shipping and all that. So, but you could certainly use that as a resource, and it has all of my covers up there with a preview, and a searchable database if you want to search for dolphins or aliens or tanks or anything like that. You could certainly go on there and
That's excellent.
find it.
I feel like
right.
the inner cover that always really hit me from the Animorphs is all of them waiting in the elevator.
From number 7.
I
love
just think
that
about
one.
what conversation would they have tried to strike up? It's such an evocative. I'm going to try and pick up a print of that.
Yeah.
That elevator is actually in the Natural History Museum in New York.
Wow.
And
No way.
One of the reasons I remember it is I was going there to take photographic reference, and a guard came up to me and said, you can't take pictures. And I said, of an elevator? And he said, no, you can't.
Elevator. That was a year
But I
base.
already taken the pictures, and I took them
This is
home.
an original
take 'em off
Monet
my camera.
elevator. Well, just thank you so much for your time, and this was such a hoot. And I remember we were all texting each other when you followed us back on Twitter, and just being like, "Whoa!" So it's so exciting to finally
made
get
it.
to talk to you and to get to ask these questions.
Well, great.
Yeah.
Well, thank you.
And one day I hope, David, to have a bookshelf behind me like yours for my
God.
recording.
No.
Because
Yeah.
that's so cool. It's been fun looking at it. during these
It's been,
conversations.
Thanks for listening to Anidorks. We'll be back soon with lots more to say. Until the Andalites return, or at least until next time. See you soon.